How's it going, everybody? My name is Max, and today I'm going to give a presentation on what is truth. And this is part of my paper that I'm currently working on in the Cadell Last Philosophy Portal Zarathustra course. So this is just a first iteration, it's a draft. I'm in the process of searching for truth and trying to figure out, as the title says here, what is truth? How do we search for truth? And finding the relationship between a limitless search for truth and the terror of that search. There's a fear of a certain type of being involved in this search that we see in Plato, Zarathustra, Heidegger, and Hegel. And this is part of a bigger project for me called Clearing a Space for Being, which I will explore and explain as we go along. Okay, so the first one is the contents. How does this search for truth come up in my philosophical research projects, which we will see now in a minute? And then what is truth itself? What prevents us from searching for the truth? And taboos that come up in ourselves and also in society. How do we search for truth personally, communally, and institutionally? And what is it to be worthy of truth? And then some objections and concerns. So my fundamental research question is, who are we? As we are. Not as we think we are, but who are we? Who have we been? Where are we going? And who do we think we've been? Who do we think we are? Who do we think we're becoming? And who do we want to be? Who do we want to have been? Who do we want to be in the future? So all of these sort of three questions and the sub-questions beside them all interrelate. What is truth? What is the best method for searching for truth? How can I be worthy of truth? Okay, so these are some sentences, some words that come up in my search for the truth. So transgression, taboo, fearless speech, and sacrificial blood writing in the search for limitless truth as a form of overcoming. Mapping, listening, and radically accepting your inner experience and the confession of your body as you write, very much in the guise of George Bataille and inspired by George Bataille here. Thoughts on how you can write about the truth in blood and about the forbidden, or how to clear a space for being and overcome yourself to find the truth. Some advice that I got, really good advice that I got from a friend was, I was talking to her about the projects that I'm working on and how they're overwhelming, and she was saying, just write as if you're going to die in 6 months. Just cut it down to the absolute essentials. And then another part is that in my projects, I'm writing in the form of literature. And Girard, Nietzsche, George Bataille in Storm of the Eye, or Story of the Eye, know this because the being sort of just jumps out of the page. In philosophy, that's harder to do. Not saying it's not impossible, but literature allows you to see somebody's being in a bigger sense. So my three projects, well, there's a third one there that I'm just going to leave out. So my two main projects are Clearing a Space for Being, Being in Terror, looking at the conditions for the possibility of self-transformation and how does truth fit into this project. And the second one is my literature project that I explained, Who Are We? A psychological, sociological, and historical investigation of who we are now in a novel form. Why are we so polarized? Multiculturalism, technology, etc. So the first emergence of truth in my novel is with Katie. And for the conservatives, Katie is, basically the enemy. For the liberals, Katie is the herald. She's the hero. So Katie says about her friend who's going through a transition at the moment to somebody who's not saying her pronouns. She says to the person who's being disrespectful to her friend, her pronouns are her. What's wrong with you people? Why can't you just accept her as she is? She has changed from being a man to a woman and identifying as being a man to a woman. And you say that you philosophers are concerned about truth, but when somebody is in front of you living her truth, you deny it. Why can't you just accept her as she is and accept the truth? There's a real Heideggerian aspect in this, that we are not objects, as he says. We are Dasein that have this opportunity to decide. how we're going to be in the truth of our lives. Honesty in Ryan, what is truth? The terror of no limit. This is a very hard one to do. Ryan is more on the right, and he's talking to his therapist about identity and race, and the therapist says, that's racist, Ryan. Why would you say something like that? And Ryan gets annoyed, and he says, look, David, his therapist, I like you, but whenever I talk about identity, people just call me a racist and shut me down. I am sick of it. I thought I could speak openly here, but obviously not. I want to search for the truth. I'm not asking you to agree with me. I'm not asking questions. I'm just asking questions, and people can't handle it. There is no problem with my mother's pure hatred of MAGA types, but when I ask the question, it's, oh, shut up, bigot. Either we're here to honestly seek truth, and we can negotiate the best way to do this, or we're not, and I'll leave. The choice is yours. You will have to explain to my mother that you failed. And so over the next sessions, we see David, the therapist, who is a very intelligent man, and Ryan, also who's very intelligent, struggle to come to terms with each other's views. So what is truth in Zarathustra? Now, I will expand this as I go along, but in general, truth is a form of absolute knowing that we see in Zarathustra. Zarathustra is trying to tell others this truth, that they can develop it too. Truth is not just the destiny, but also the process of overcoming yourself, breaking the glass cage that consciousness is in to see the world anew. And this overcoming, this process, is absolutely essential in Zarathustra. The CBT, sort of exposure work, and psychoanalysis for personal aspects would be very related to what Zarathustra is doing. So how does truth relate to death? Well, as we will see throughout the presentation that I'm giving here today, the tightrope walker and the explorer are two very similar parts. The explorer is very similar to the child in that it's just innately curious. It's not judgmental. And the explorer has to really think about this. This is a picture from Shackleton when he was doing his exploring. You know, I mean, you had these people exploring the world and they didn't know what they were going to find. And they had no choice. So they had to say, right, I could die in this expedition and I'm going to do it anyway. And we see also in Hegel's phenomenology, this is the stages of conscious development. So, and we also see this in Plato's cave. So this constant stage-like development and process is very important. So the problem in Ryan, what stops us or prevents us from searching from the truth? A blindness from ideology or being attached to certain values, overly judgmental. I mean, if you're just constantly being judgmental, how are you going to be an explorer? You're not going to be able to explore and find new things. If you're really judgmental, how if Darwin was judgmental, how could he have found evolution? It's, you know, fear, anger, arrogance, inflexibility. There's a quote in Zarathustra about that. Externalizing, moralization, relation to a wound, if you don't want to investigate that. Pity, which is a theme that's going to come up in this presentation. And if you're in a position of weakness or strength, it's going to have a determination on how you search for the truth. In regards to pity, though, to go back onto that, some people will use pity or a wound as a method to gain power, and some will do it to try and just seek truth. But it's a fine balance. Reason and emotions, miscommunication, appearance and reality, attachment, disgust mechanism. A safety is really important and wanting to be part of society. Elizabeth Noel Newman wrote a book called The Spiral of Silence, which is right here, Public Opinion and Our Social Skin, how people, and this is in Germany, how people will just conform. And so a common theme is that in this is this idea of just wanting to conform, but also not being willing to look and accept things as they are. So a prime example of this is the taboos of our current age in society. And even by mentioning these words, the Great Replacement, identity, race, gender, sexuality, pedophilia, genocide, Holocaust, revisionism or denial, And as we've seen recently with Salman Rushdie, the Islamic cartoons and Prophet Muhammad, as soon as I say these things, there's an atmospheric change. There's what I call the suspicious stare, and the beast of a million eyes. We're seeing this now particularly with social media, where if somebody has done something wrong, there's a descending of this stare. And this is part of the phenomenology of anxiety, or the phenomenology of terror that I'm trying to work on, that this force will try to eviscerate you or part of you through a stare and a moral condemnation. And your work, if you're going to be a public intellectual, or even yourself, is to confront this, and to say, no, I am going to work through aspects like this, and your judgment is not going to deter me. So what is your own taboo? What are your own taboos in your own life in regards to sexuality, guilt, shame, and fear? So we have this blocking that we've seen. So what is the solution? My solution that I'm going to argue is clearing. And we see this in Heidegger, Lichtung, Aletheia. I actually have Martin Heidegger's book, The Essence of Truth. And in this book, which is a book that I'm going to work with, Plato's Cave Allegory and the Theaetetus. So that's one book that I have to read for this. But even on a more fundamental aspect, clearing is a central component of life. I mean, I'm in my bedroom at the moment. It's not the tidiest. You have to clear your finances out. You have to sometimes have conversations with people or your friends to try and clear out the relationship. Our ontology as human beings is messy. We aren't given, absolute knowing. So as we've seen here, truth is a process. You're changing, clearing debris out of your mind, trying to break the glass of consciousness that you find yourself in. And, you also see this in the old tribes. They would have cleared an area for agriculture to start. So how do we search for truth? How do we clear, as I'm arguing here, and how do we clear? Well, we see in Zarathustra that we have the camel, the lion, and the child. So we have attitude. If you're going to be the camel, you're going to have a different attitude to the lion or the child when you're looking for truth. And then we also have processes of clearing that you can do, which I'm going to go through. And then we have this relational aspect. So you might be the camel, and you might take up a process for clearing, for instance, free association or whisper analysis, which we'll talk about in a minute. But how you do that as a camel will differ from how you do that as a lion. And then we have analysis or becoming or deliberation. And then we have non-analysis, just being as it is, and acceptance. And this polarity between acceptance and rational reasoning and deliberation. Now, there is two ways that I was talking with a friend about of reading or approaching the camel, the lion, and the child. But it seems that if you're coming to it in a sort of resentful mode, you can become a sort of a camel, you can become a lion, but it's very hard for you to become the child, because the resentful person will always keep the wound with them. We see this contemporary in this idea of oppression. And there is oppression. Of course, there's oppression. But how you relate to that oppression is of fundamental importance. Are you willing to let that oppression go? To go beyond it? So here we have the heavy camel, the parent, or another metaphor you could say is the crane. And as I said there, you have the wounds, exploit them for power, understanding, or both. And of course, this can be complex and intertwined, as we see with Nietzsche, that there is no sort of purity thesis here. There's an inextricability with all of this. But we have to work through it nonetheless. And how we work through it is important. So then we go from the heavy camel, and then we go into the lion. And for me, anyway, identity is the biggest weight that I can look at, because I'm a sort of a masochist and a kamikaze. So the kamikaze and the camel and the lion seem to be, in a sense, related. Now, Sloterdijk is very interesting here. There was a question raised by Quinn in the seminar last night. How do we do this? And I'm really thinking about how we assess all of this clearing aspect. And Sloterdijk is very good here, because in his book Spheres, he talks about human history. Basically, now this isn't exactly what he said, but basically is the history of spherical expansion and retreat. Now we can think this individually, in our minds, but also politically. And you have to fight to be able to have that space. So you might do extra work to get 2 weeks off, to be able to give yourself that solitude. There is practical stuff. You will go to bed early so that you can get up early. You will do practical things that will give you the space to clear. Maybe this isn't the best structure here, but again, we're coming to the line, and the line has to fight. The line really has to fight tooth and nail to say no. And this will come in the form of friendships and relationships where you just feel you can't be yourself. You don't have the deep relationship to search for truth. And if we look at people who are willing to do this, we see it in the kamikaze. We see it in the jihad and the suicide bombers, but also in the monks before that do the self-immolation. And a friend of mine was talking to me the other day and asking, what is the difference between, he was concerned about the relationship between truth and death, that it becomes this sort of form of terrorism. And one has to be very, very, very careful here that you're doing your ontology and your epistemology correct. If you're a kamikaze looking for truth, and for example, you're in your plane and you're going towards the truth, and you get a message in, and the message is saying, look, that's the wrong target, you're going to the wrong place. You as a driver, as a kamikaze, have to be able to veer away and come back again and assess what's going on. If you're just sort of blind ideologically, you're not looking for the truth. As Nietzsche says in the Zarathustra, any man who's inflexible, the truth won't come to him. There is also a qualitative difference, I think, between the structure or the form of the suicide bomber and the monk that does the self-immolation, because the jihad, the whole point is to hurt others. Now, of course, he believes in God and Allah and the other world. But this is something that I'm trying to wrestle with at the moment. Cadell said some very interesting stuff about being and nothingness, but I will come back to this. It's not something that I'm fully fleshed out on. So this brings us to the relationship between death. I mean, death comes out screaming from the line. What does your own dead body look like? What are you willing? Do you want to live and search for the truth? And if you're doing that, like Socrates had to do, like all philosophers, which is the history of heretics, you have to meditate on your own mortality. So here we have the child, an Amazon explorer, innocence. And then when you've done all that fighting, you have to become innocent again. You have to sort of say, okay, I risked my life, as Salman Rushdie has, another example. But to try and work through the sheer weight of that doesn't weigh you down and destroy you. The person who reaches this state can not. So for example, you're trying to deal with the resentment of it all, and there's something about the explorer that is sort of free. He will look at an Amazonian tribe and he won't judge them. He'll just say, okay, this is very interesting. I want to understand what is the symbolic meaning and structure of their people. So How do we do this? As I've said before, you're trying to break and go into a different stage of consciousness, which is scary. It is to do with the tightrope. You might fall. Two aspects that I've found, I've done more so on the whisper analysis and less on the free association, is you become observant as to the whispers of your desire. You become much more of an observer of yourself rather than a judger of yourself, which is a hard thing to do. It's not easy. Another thing that I've found is, particularly in my work with the literature, I've been able to understand from within. You know, it's sort of in a way like a Christ-like, a Jesus Christ-like ethic, where you go to the lepers and you say, okay, what's it like to be a leper? And hang out with the lepers, hang out with the weirdos and the freaks. And as you do this, you are much more, you try to be as in tune as much with your body. Why does this sentence or this thought make my body ache and scream? And you go towards that. Another thing that I've found is making the argument for your enemy. Assume that they know more than you. If you're going in to do exploring and searching for truth, your enemy might be correct. You know, to go in and search for truth and presuppose what you're going to find is just, I think, it is definitely not truth seeking. You're seeking. You haven't found it. That's the whole point. A radical insistence on looking for what is first. You exhaust and exhaust and exhaust what is, then you can come back and potentially make it a moral situation. The same with facts. And, you know, as I said, listen to your disgust and your emotional triggers. So that's the individual aspect, which I'm going to continue to work on. I want to talk about now the communal and the institutional aspect. We have serious issues in the education. I mean, it is, I could just talk days and days and days about the bureaucratic nature, the internal ego, that's the safety that education institutes seem to prioritize over truth. And what I want to do in this sort of new university for human being that is based on this idea of clearing and Lichtung and Aletheia, and this process, is that the process is the most important thing itself. You become a virtuous person, virtue ethics, and you help people at every single aspect of their humanity. So the institution is designed for greatness and to help humans accept as they are. And we have these institutions today. I mean, this isn't just, we're not talking about huge institutions. I have a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu gym that I go down to. I go down and you can go and do some CBT therapy. You can go in and you can dance in salsa. But what I want to do is bring all of these institutions together in the same area and same place. So you will start in the morning doing your academic research, then you go to your fight club or the next institution, as you'll see. There's going to be a major Nietzschean influence on these institutions. Man is a bridge. This is for the Superman. Love the body. Marriage, the rabble, all different hierarchical needs for the individual person. So I'm still trying to make up the name, but we have the new Garden of Knowledge, or the new university. And this is the design. So we can take a big garden, let's say Central Park in New York. This is an ideal. This is completely utopian and ideal, but these can be set up right now. But for argument's sake, we'll go with the highest goal. So number one institute would be the School of Theoretical Curiosity. And you tap into people's own curiosity. You don't just say, right, you have to learn Proust if somebody doesn't want to learn Proust. If somebody wants to learn Shakespeare, let them learn Shakespeare. You know, and you don't just say, oh, well, you have to learn algebra. You go, okay, well, what are you interested in? Well, I'm interested in the music business. Okay, learn maths for the music business. Let people say and guide you what you want, and have this sort of polarity and toing and froing between the student and the teacher, who knows what people need to know. They need to know maths very well. They need to be able to think properly and theoretically and logically and communicate. But how they learn that, they can learn that through doing a thesis on hip hop or doing a thesis on Nietzsche. Once you have your communication, your problem solving, and your mathematical reasoning, then you're fine. The second one is conflict. And you have a institute there, like the boxing club that I go down to, and you have somebody who's good at teaching people genuinely how to fight. But then you also have somebody there who looks at the existential aspect of conflict. What is it to be like to be punched in the face? You know, helping people to go through this fear and the anxiety of fighting. So that's the second one. The third one is the Existential Institute. I mean, Freud, Heidegger, Nietzsche, everything that we're doing in this course, where you would help people to deal with the negativity of life, grief, loss, anxiety. The fourth one is friendship. As a fundamental civilizational goal, it is unacceptable that you go to college and as a child you have, you know, friendship is a big thing. But then when you become an adult, it just becomes what? There's no structure to it. Oh, it's something that you do after work. I mean, let's build it together so that we can, you know, we have these big problems in our society of people being lonely, incels, hikikomori. We need to structure this aspect of human civilization. There's men and women out there that find it hard to find somebody. Bring them all together. Have a room in the Friendship Institute for philosophy. Have a room for the makeup, the people who are interested in makeup. Have a room for people who want to do salsa. And then what you will do within this institute is you will have other more discrete groups, you know, Sexuality Institute, the Tantra Institute. So you'd have somebody like Dimitri there who would look out for people who he can see, okay, there's something different in this person. He might be interested in doing Tantra. Then you have the Creativity and Art Institute, which of course, I mean, I have the National College of Art and Design in Ireland just up the road from me. And then we have the Care Institute. And that is looking at how we care. You know, you could argue plausibly, I think, that the 20th century was one of the central problems is we didn't know how to care. You know, there was cynical care. There was totalitarian care. And then the seventh one is the Shrine of the Absolute, and that is the Parthenon, if I'm correct, where you would start 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Okay, so in the morning you would go to 1, then after 2, then after 3, then after 4, then after 5 and 6. And what you would do is you would do this for 4 years, just cycling through these institutions, and then you would go off and do your work. So you might go and do, you know, become a military man or whatever, and you leave this. But some people will continue to go on this cycle and continue just years and years and years and years of going through all of these institutes. And then eventually they will end up in the Shrine of the Absolute or the Absolute Knowing Institute, where they give lectures on what they found from doing this cyclical aspect. So this is like building in the eternal reoccurrence of the same, just constant discovery of what it means to be finite human being. And we can do this now. I mean, we can actually set up these institutions right now. It's a matter of doing it. In these institutions, you would have a negotiation of gradients and polarities, always to accept. And you would have the masses versus the elites, danger and safety, conservative, liberal, hierarchy, equality, tantra, sutra, conformist, non-conformist, rational, unrational, love, hate, young, old, wise, unwise, natural consciousness, absolute consciousness, philic, phobic, teacher, student, passive, aggressive, oriented, loss. I could go on. But the whole point is to have these polarities that we see in Zarathustra and to integrate them. One concern that one would have as well, isn't this too disciplined? You know, could this turn into totalitarian aspect? And I agree that you could turn this into some sort of mass aspect. And this is why the individual must choose the level of intensity. I may want level 5, an extreme level of intensity when it comes to philosophy and computer science, but a level 1 when it comes to salsa. That's my decision. Nobody else can make that decision. You can negotiate that decision with your instructor, but you make that decision. And the design of institution is of high trust, emotional intelligence, clear responsibility, transparency. Secret or discrete clubs, like the Tantra Club, will be accountable to other discrete clubs. Acceptance, radical listening, equal power centers, anti-bureaucracy office, and quality of person. Different quality of person. So the concerns would be that you're in these institutions dealing with entropy or ideological subversion, ill discipline, and incompetence. But what you try to do is you build these concerns into the institution. So for instance, the institutions would be designed not as governed by one person, but governed by four, with four different schools in the one school. So you would have the school run by Cadell, the school run by Bard, the school run by Quinn, the school run by Dimitri. And these individual people would then install their own ethos. And if their ethos isn't good enough, people would just vote by their feet and go to the different schools. So there's a constant natural competition going on. And you have offices like the School for Ideological Subversion. So you would have a unit in one of the universities saying, okay, well, how is Dimitri going to go and declare ideological war in Cadell's university? Except that these things happen in Ireland or in human beings. I mean, don't just say, oh, it doesn't happen. Just say, yeah, it happens. Okay, so how can we harness it? What can we learn from this sort of Machiavellian type thinking? And you're trying to develop a quality of individual. You start with the pupil, then you go to the graduates, then the teachers, then the mediators. I don't think I spelled that correctly. And then you go to the elders, and then you go back to the student again. So you're constantly going on this cycle. You're not trying to learn in the school of theoretical curiosity by memorization or problem solving. As I said, this is so basically this is the Fight Club here. So the problem that you would have with the Fight Club is in certain countries you have men who just go around and just speak the language of violence. So you would have in the Fight Club, a good quality of men that would come in and say, okay, you want to pick on people that they can't defend themselves. Okay, then let's pick on somebody who can. Bullying, you sort that out. Ethnic conflict. I mean, the 20th century, it tells us that we need to deal with ethnic conflict in a much more sophisticated way. You may not see identity, but identity can see you. And that's just a fact of life that we have to negotiate. Okay, Sloterdijk has this idea of rage banks in his Rage and Time, and I think that's really important, that you go into the Institute of the Study of Conflict or Fight Club, and you get as angry as you can. You fight. Then we have the Existential Condition Institute, again, dealing with all of these problems, as I said, problem of grief, loss, stress, a place to be alone and to be comforted by people. And also a place to confess, a place to deal with the deep parts of your soul. Reflecting on who you are, the Hall of Mirrors, the room of secrecy and the rooms of forgiveness. And you work to these rooms. They don't just happen, but you work for years on this. Then, of course, as I said, the Art Institute, and an art that means something, not crap about my grills or my $1,000 chain. Real stuff. As I said, the one example actually about the institution of care, which is very important, is what I've noticed in homeless problem is that you have this whole industry that springs up. Oh, we're helping homeless. You have to donate, and they do good work, but there is also a racket that goes on with it. You have to. If you have the problem of homelessness, then it can exacerbate, and then all of these NGOs can come up about, and they won't have their job if the homeless problem goes away. As I said earlier on, Stalinist communism came in apart from the deification of the working class and the perverse caring of the working class. So much so that it wasn't caring. As I've said about the problem of loneliness and incels, and then we have the absolute Parthenon. So what is it to be worthy of truth? Well, to be really worthy of truth, it needs a civilizational change and also a personal change. Now, one concern, three concerns is that this is sort of perspectival is pity. I don't think it is. Your motivation for philosophical inquiry is about pity. Are you genuinely coming from this place where you want to get revenge and you want to hit people and you don't want to understand, and you're going to have your ideological blinkers and you're sort of manipulating? That's more cunning. But if you're really trying to rip your soul apart and understand somebody from another perspective, I mean, I don't see how that would be pity. But it's something that I'm going to meditate on more. True thing has nothing to do with that. Well, I mean, tell that to Shackleton. I mean, tell that to any explorer. I mean, tell that to Bruno, who was burned at the stake. Tell that to Galileo. Tell that to Mahatma Gandhi. I mean, depending on your research project, if you're just researching maths, I mean, then you're grand. But if you're doing anything social or sociological, you might run into this problem. And you have to, as a result, meditate on that. Are you willing to do it? And how you do it is really important. You have to wrestle with what you believe in. Because if you don't wrestle with it, then you're just being an ideologue. This is all utopian thinking. It won't last. Of course, you know, but we have to try. We have to attempt it. You know what I mean? Of course, you can fail. I mean, if you were to go back in 1,000 years' time and say, well, you know, Europe would be, there would be Muslim people in Europe and there would be multiculturalism in Europe, people would say, that Jesus, that couldn't happen. My God, but it does, and we have to try to think differently. So that's my initial thoughts on my presentation. It's still a work in progress, but yes, if you have any reflections, I would greatly appreciate it. Take care.